Sorry, National Education, period 2018 to 2023, Professor Dr. Hidayat, Rector of Universitas Islam International Indonesia, Professor Dr. Jamhari, Academic Senate of Universitas Islam International Indonesia, Rifki Munaf PhD, Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences, Philip J. Winanti PhD, Professor in International Relations at Gadjah Mada University, Professor Winanti, all the professors and staff of Faculty of Social Sciences, distinguished attendees, ladies and gentlemen. We are delighted to welcome you to the Theater Hall building of Universitas Islam International Indonesia in the occasion of the first ASIS mini conference by the topic The Rise of China and Power Dynamic in the Global South on Wednesday, December 13, 2023. I am Salsabila Shadazara, and on behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to extend our highest appreciation for your attendance and participation. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the President of ASIS, Nizar Lukman, to deliver a welcoming speech. To our brother Nizar, stage is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning, everyone. My name is Nizar. I'm very grateful today to be here in front of you guys, and welcome to everyone here. The Honorable our Dean, Pak Philips, Pak Rifki, and the Honorable our distinguished guest from Gadjah Mada University, Professor Poppy Sulistianing. Thank you for coming. Welcome to Triple IU. I'd like to convey my greatest grateful today for this occasion is come to reality for everyone's support. And then this agenda aimed to provide student to be prepare in the case of research. That's our goal. So some of the student might be struggle with how to write a good research topic. So we are planning to have this by giving the keynote speaker from Gadjah Mada University to give us a knowledge about the China's rise nowadays. And then for next, we are planning to have panel session after this, because we want to encourage students to present their topic to be developed. We will get suggestion and advice from our fellow as the panelists, and then we hope that student could create a better research topic based on the suggestion from the fellow or the panelists. So that's our agenda today and our plan for everyone who already come, my beloved friends here. Thank you very much, and I'd like to say thank you for Bu Poppy to come so far away from Yogyakarta to here, and thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you for the warm welcoming speech. And the next opening speech will be delivered by the Dean of Faculty of Social Sciences. To Dr. Philip J. Vermonti, the stage is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning to everyone. Thank you for coming, and special thank you for Professor Poppy Winanti. I'm happy to report to our students, Professor Poppy is the first female professor of international relations in Indonesia from Gadjah Mada University. So this is certainly an honor. It's a good showcase as well to our students coming from many different countries that the discipline of international relations in Indonesia is more, I think, exciting now because we get more perspectives. Usually in the past, IR is some kind of a male-dominated perspective, but lately, at least in the past few years, we've seen more and more IR scholars female IR scholars with many agenda to be discussed. So we are grateful to have Professor Poppy coming to this. I told her earlier that this is a startup university, right? That's our way of shielding some of still our many weaknesses and organizing and running the university, especially the Faculty of Social Sciences, because startup is a startup. Right? You have to deal with so many obstacles with some kind of a founder's mentality. And the students also, I think this is the second and third batch of our students. They are the founders with founders mentality, with can-do attitude. And with that, I'd like to highlight my special thanks as well to the association of our students association. And this is purely organized by the students themselves. I'm not cawe-cawe, right? I'm not intervening, except for one thing. When Nizar and friends, as the chair of the assist this year, asking about who's going to be the right keynote speaker for this student conference. And of course, immediately Professor Poppy's name came to my mind and would be the great speaker, not only because of her expertise, but because a few months ago, Faculty of Social Sciences went to Gadjah Mada University to visit and meet our colleagues of Faculty of Social and Political Sciences at Gadjah Mada University, and we discussed many plans. We signed MOUs, and we highlighted the need for the two university, especially Faculty of Social Sciences here and Visipol UGM, to have shared agenda. Because as a startup university, I was telling the dean, my good friend Professor Wawan, Dr. Wawan Masudi, and Professor Poppy and friends, that we are younger, so we are seeking protection from our older brothers and sisters at Gadjah Mada University. So we've done the some part of our responsibility to that MOU. We had offered a fellowship, writing fellowship, to one of the lecturers, PhD candidate Arya Budi, who is doing his dissertation at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. He's here with us for 4 months. And I don't know, maybe later he would come. And then now, second thing that I think part of our commitment to really execute the MOU from our part is that having you coming here. Third, the topic is, as Nizar mentioned, this is about, what is it? Exposing our students. They organize themselves. They are, and you are graduate students. You are not undergrad. So when Nizar and friends came to me asking this and that, if you are undergrad, I will tell you what to do. But if because you are graduate student, I will not tell you what to do. You solve your problems. You negotiate with lecturers or with Professor Poppy directly, and with the university administration and so on and so forth. I can, if I want, but this is your event. And then I'm glad that part of the idea of our student association is that to expose and then to force students to present whatever works in the classroom that you're doing, papers, or you may in the middle of writing something that you want to publish in the various academic outlets and so on. So you're going to present, you're going to receive friendly, collegial comments. You are not torturing your panelists. Right? And this is, I think, the attitude that we need to develop as well at this university, that we have to be collegial and comment other person's paper, provide constructive and helping fellow students in terms of making their papers better ones. So you are not actually imposing your view on others, but you are trying to understand what others are writing, and then you can provide some kind of helpful comments in order for them to be better writing, and as well as you to be a collegial member of the university, especially in the Faculty of Social Sciences. So once again, thank you very much. And Nizar and friends, we really appreciate. This is part of the Faculty of Social Sciences mission to provide academic experience inside the classroom and outside the classroom, because this is also part. It's never been enough just to study within the classroom. This kind of event give you more, I think, hopefully, more learning experience, because you are learning from your peer. If Bu Poppy and Pak Rifki commenting on your papers or work in the classroom, it is from the higher position in a way, because they've done their PhD, they're done with the study. But although in the classroom we want to have fair exchanges on equal basis, but somehow you have to acknowledge there is a power relations, right? Involved in that kind of classroom setting. But now you're going to have this as a peer reviews among yourself. Speaking about power relations, Ibu Poppy, once again, our students are coming from Global South. And this is very relevant today. There are a lot of issues, global issues, involving more dialogues and more, if I may say, maybe tension between the global North and global South. And we want to understand what is really going on and what should be our response to various international dynamics. And one of the issue is that the rise of China and how power dynamics involved in the global South. So I hope that this is going to be a very enlightening experience for all of us. We would be listening to Professor Poppy Winanti. She's the expert on this particular issue. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Dr. Philip. That was a remarkable opening speech. Ladies and gentlemen, next on agenda is the placard handover by the Dean of Faculty of Social Sciences to Professor in International Relations at Gadjah Mada University. To Dr. Phillips and Dr. Poppy, please join us on the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and participants, we have gathered here today to explore the crucial topics of the rise of China and power dynamic in the global south. These themes are at the forefront of global discussions and have a significant impact on our world's economic and environmental landscape. Our distinguished speaker today, Professor Dr. Poppy Sulistiani Winanti, is a professor in international relations at Gadjah Mada University. Now I will give the forum to Famara Wasa Jawala, Master Student in Political Science, Faculty of Social Sciences, who will lead the forum.
Yeah, so many things happen when it's a startup university. So, good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. Our honorable head of faculty and social sciences, Dr. Vermonte, and a warm welcome to our honorable guest speaker, Professor Dr. Poppy S. Winanti. Respected lecturers, fellows here, and the organization team, President of ASIS, Nizar, and my fellow students. My name is Famara Jaula from the Gambia, and it gives me a great pleasure to be moderating this event of the first mini conference organized by the Student Association of Political and Social Sciences, and on a very important topic raised by Pa Phillips here, the rise of China and power dynamics in the global South countries. So, as we know today, just a quick overview of the topic. China's rapid economic growth, military and political influence in the global South has been one of the greatest defining moments of our time. And this transformation has far-reaching implications in the region and beyond, and not only for the people of China, but for the global economy as a whole, and for the geopolitical landscape in the region. So there are challenges, especially to the traditional notion of power, and also influences that are happening in the region, but also has opened new opportunities, especially on the economic aspect of it, and other aspect of development. So later on, the professor will give us an insight onto what does the rise of China mean for the global South, and also the implications and the outcomes along this while it is navigating the power dynamics in the region and other big players. So, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to give a brief introduction to our honorable guest speaker. So, Professor Dr. S. Winanti is the Vice Dean for Academic and Student Affairs at the Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, University of Gadjah Mada in Yogyakarta, but also a professor of international relations. So she did her master's in international relations at the School of Public Policy at Korea Development Institute in 2002, and master's in international relations at the London School of Economics and Political Science in the UK, as part of an awardee of the Chevening Scholarship. We should say amen to this, yeah. So she did her doctor's at politics at the University of Glasgow in the UK, and research interest has been conflict and political economy, governance in extractive industries, multinational corporation, intellectual property right, World Trade Organization, and so forth. So she also did academic publications, and last night I did just a quick search of your name, and a lot of publications came in, book chapters, journals she wrote individually, and also books she co-authored. So before the presentation begins, first I would like to just give us a little bit overview of how this is going to work. First, our honorable guest speaker will speak or present for 45 minutes. And after that, we'll have a question and answer session in two sessions, 3 in the first and 3 in the second session. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, now allow me to welcome Professor Poppy S. Winanti to give an insight onto the above mentioned topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Please allow me to stand up. I hope that's all right. Oh, here is all right. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for Pak Philip, Pak Rifki, and also the lecturers, and I think Mas Nizar, and also some of the students who are inviting me to come to this special event. I know Pak Philip has repeatedly saying that this startup university, but I remember when Pak Philip came and the delegation came to UGM some time ago, like a few weeks ago, we discussed the opportunity of being the startup university is much more sort of like higher than more established university like UGM. So that's why I think, despite the fact that Pak Philip said this startup university, but I can see a very potential university in not in the so long, but in the near future. I think that really something that I can see the way you organize this event, and the way Pak Philip and also the team in this UIII. I think I still am using Bahasa Indonesia for the UIII. Anyway, so thank you for having me here, and very warm also introducing from the moderator. It is an honor for me to be here. I met Pak Philip quite some time. We shared the same forum a few weeks ago, so I hope that you are not getting bored with me, Pak Philip, because many times we have shared the forum. But anyway, for this morning, I would like to discuss a very important, timely topics regarding the rise of China. And as I think the information regarding this university, that most of the students coming from the global south, that also makes me very delighted, because again, the global south is also something that we need to discuss a little bit more in details. And at international relations department at UGM, we also using the global south as one of the research flagship in our department. So I think very potential collaboration with all of you, and also with the faculty from where I'm working at. The rise of China, why this is matter? I think most of you who are studying, at least in international relations, at some point you may come across with this statement. Nobody knows whether this is really Napoleon Bonaparte who said that. But every time I'm looking at any references, any sort of like literatures about the rise of China, this kind of statement is always there. You see, from this statement, I think, despite the fact that whether this is really Napoleon Bonaparte is saying or not, but the fact that the substance of this statement is really sort of like at this moment we see it's coming true, right? Back then it was like the big giant is still sleeping, so let her sleep, because when she wakes, then it will shake the world. That's what happened now. That's why now we are discussing the rise of China. I think this, again, despite the fact whether this statement is really coming from Napoleon Bonaparte or not, but the substance of his statement is really true. This is the one that we are currently witnessing. Why it is very important for us to discuss and to understand the rise of China and the rest of the questions, and how does this affect the rest of the world, and especially the global South countries. I'm going to discuss this to make it more structured. I would like to discuss these topics, but I think the most important aspect is when we need to discuss the impact, the implications of the rise of China for the rest of the world and also the global South. There are some aspect of how we see the rise of China, what sort of like evidence that we are witnessing, in what sort of like measures that we really understand that the rise of China is really something in our sort of like in our age now. I'm going to discuss some of these questions. I think, moderator, I'm not going to use the 45 minutes. I think it's too long. I'm going to use less than that in order for us to have more discussion. So I'm going to cover some of these questions. The first one is what sort of like evidence that we are seeing that this is really the rise of China. the next question is what sort of like impact that it will have, especially in regard to what we say as the global politics or the dynamics or the global political economy. Then the most important thing is whether and then how then it will have the implications for the global south like us. And next questions is also important whether the rise of China is going to lead something. What we see, some scholars consider that what we see with the rise of China is leading to what we call as the new Cold War. I'm not really sure, Pak Philip and Pak Rifki. I think the students now are not living during the Cold War era. Most of you born after the Cold War, no? Only some of you, yes. I know that some of you probably already born during the Cold War. Probably what you think is just something in the history. So, but some scholars, they consider that, the rise of China is something probably will be replicating what happened during the Cold War era between the competition, the rivalry between the great powers between the US and USSR. Is that really what we're going at? We don't know yet, but that's going to be one of the questions that we're going to cover this morning. The first aspect that how we see that the rise of China is really there. The rise of China is something that we really need to care. In some of the discussions, I keep repeating saying that, we just cannot ignore the big elephant in the room. That's China. It is just too blunt to be ignored. So that's why one of the characteristics or one of the evidences of the rise of China is its military expansion and the way the Chinese government is modernizing the military forces. Some of the studies shows that within the last 30 years, there has been some sort of like modernization in terms of the military forces in China. Their aim is very clear. It's no longer just improving the military forces, but improving in order to make a more sophisticated and high technology military forces. So that's what the Chinese government aim at, militarizing and then equipping the military forces with this sort of like high technology equipments. We also see that the Chinese military building increasingly emphasizing into several aspects. As we can see, one of the most important thing is the maritime security. And then we also see then how then the Chinese government is really investing in cyber operations. So we are not only talking about just merely technological advancement, but also this is really something related to the how high technological improvement in terms of their military forces. So military expansion and modernization is one of the characteristics that why then the rise of China is really something that happening. How then they are trying to be a world-class military by 2049. That is also one of the policies that currently undertaken by the Chinese government. So this is only one of the characteristics. We are having several others characteristics in order to ensure that this is really happening. The second aspect that this is also very important, that everyone, including the Dean earlier mentioned, that the rise of China is also characterized by the economic development influence. Indonesia, for example, China is now becoming one of the largest foreign investors in Indonesia. Starting from, especially after the sign of ASEAN China Free Trade Agreement, Indonesia's and China's trade relations is significantly increased over the last 10 years. Not only that, we see that even the World Bank acknowledged that what happened in China is the fastest sustained expansion by a major country in the world within the last 10 to 20 years. We see from the China's development. The second aspect is now China has become the world's largest economy, not only in terms of the purchasing power, but also manufacturer, the best, and then the largest merchandise trader, and also holder for the foreign exchange reserves. So we see that China has this sort of like characteristics. Not only that, China is now the largest trading partners for most of the nations, around 128, the data says that, and including also the major trading partners for the US. This is also something that will be some of the considerations that we need, whether it's going to lead to the war, it's going to lead to the Cold War or not, and so on and so forth. This is also another aspect that we need to consider. So again, as I mentioned earlier, not only in terms of the trading, but also in terms of the foreign direct investment. One of the aspects that China is currently doing is like supporting state-owned enterprises to have the global engagement, to expand globally. So it was government support for their state-owned enterprises to invest globally as part of the what we call used to be OBOR, but now it is known as the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI. It is trying to create what the Chinese government said as the China's connectivity. Not only that, what we see from the economic development and also the economic development influence is the Chinese government policy regarding what they call as the Made in China 2025. Now it's already 2023, so it's already like 3 years from now. It was first introduced a couple years ago. 2025, Made in China 2025 is something that the US government is being concerned because from this sort of like policy, Chinese government is trying to make their industry, especially in high tech and digital industries, technological, it's much more advanced. And then even though it has never been sort of like stated clearly, but then one of the concerns regarding Made in China 2025 is making China as the global sort of like player in this kind of sectors. So especially digital sort of like technology and so on and so forth. Another aspect why then we see the rise of China is because now, as I mentioned earlier briefly, that China is now the largest foreign exchange reserves in the world, including China is having the US sort of like, treasury securities. So you can imagine even the large major power country like the US is very dependent toward China because of China's now is the largest foreign holder of the US treasury securities. So these are the examples and the characteristics and the conditions, and probably to show again what we see here is real. What we see here is the rise of China with this kind of characteristics. Another aspect we see, this is also related to the previous discussion regarding the military equipment, military forces. But another aspect that China is also developing is becoming what they call as the advanced technology leadership. China is currently already replacing the US for some of these high-tech manufacturers, including, for example, producing automobiles, producing computers, smartphones, and so on and so forth. So now China is becoming the leader producers of these sectors in terms of the advanced technology leadership. I visited China probably 2018 before COVID, and we had a chance to visit some of the factories, automobiles factories, robotics factories, drone factories. To be honest, I found it very fascinating. For the autonomous vehicle, I know that recently it was like 5 years ago. Tesla is already leading there, but then we know 5 years have already produced it. So they show it that they're already there. The technology is already advanced. It's just a matter of the license from the government. It should be released to the market. So it was like 5 years ago. So how then the autonomous vehicle, but some people have now having the experience of, riding the autonomous vehicle, but that was like 5 years ago. It's already there in China. Not only that, when we visited the robotics factory, I don't know whether your generation is familiar with the Iron Man movie. No? Yeah. I don't know which Iron Man movie because there are several Iron Man movie. But if you remember, there is one movie that the Iron Man had to deal with some sort of like what was that? The replicate of the Iron Man but the robots, the robotics, it's weaponized. You see, I don't know which movie that was. Oh, three. Okay, thank you, Nazar. Yeah. So that was that movie. I was like, okay, this is just sci-fi. This is just Hollywood made movie. But when I came to that factory, I see that for real. That robots. Very like hundreds robots. It wasn't weaponized. We don't know, to be honest. But then the competition regarding the technology is then if you can have the robots like that weaponized and then only one click button, then they can do whatever you order them. It was exactly like the Iron Man 3, right? All the robots are just click and then they attack I don't know, the defense in the US or whatever. So that was real. They have this kind of robots, and it's just like you can imagine only one click button, and they can just do whatever you order them to do. They said that yeah, what we asked them to do is dancing. That is very peaceful, no? So those robots are designed to be dancing together. So they said that the technological competition is regarding whether you can order as many as robots you can in one click away. So that was the technological advancement that they have. Another aspect is drone. I know the US and some other countries have already developing the drone for the weaponized drone as well. And China is also developing the same thing. Again, when they give us the tour, they told us that the drone is only for the humanitarian action. The drone is important, especially to reach some of the areas that cannot be reached by people directly, but they can send, humanitarian aid, things like that, during the natural disaster, things like that. One of the aspects in terms of the technological advancement and competition is if you can have the drone, a small drone with a very durable battery. And then with that kind of situation, that kind of drone can also carry certain sort of like, package. So you see, package can be humanitarian aid, but it can be also weapon. You know what I mean? So that's also the thing that they are now is there already. They are developing the artificial intelligence, they're developing the semiconductor biotechnology and so on and so forth in order to make them as the cyber superpower. And the one that currently is our directly experiencing is the technology for the 5G. The Indonesian government is just starting to adopting the 5G technology. Our study shows that some of the European studies quite reluctant to adopt the 5G technology because who own the technology for the 5G technology? Yes, most of them are the Chinese companies. So if your cell phone now is using the 5G technology, you have to remember those are the technology that owned by only a few companies in the world, and most of them are coming from China. Some of the European countries, based on our study, shows that they are not, or they're postponing adopting the 5G technology because they need to understand how it works and what will the impact for their own, technology advancements, because it's all related and then depending on the Chinese company's technology. So this aspect, the advanced technology leadership. So we've been discussing the military, improvement. We're discussing the economic development. We're also discussing the advanced technology leadership by Chinese government. But then what does it mean? The last aspect that we show that is how then the rise of China is currently influencing the way Chinese government also adopting what we call as the soft power. And also how then whatever they have now are being used in order to spear their influence and also in terms of the global governance institutions. For those who are studying IR, you are familiar with the terms of the soft power, all right? So now we also not only witness that the rise of China is characterized by its military advancement, its technological advancement, and its economic development influence, but also we see some of their role in terms of, influencing the global governance institutions. Some of the studies show that what we see here is the great power politics with Chinese characteristic. What does it mean by the Chinese characteristic? What is it, and then how will this impact us? One of the aspects that we also see is now, at least for the last 10 to 20 years, we have been witnessing that Chinese government is also promoting what we call as the soft power campaign. How do they work? They're establishing some of the Confucian institutes worldwide. One of my alma maters was also got their funding to establish the Confucian Institute in the university, but it was only one out of like 550. There are also 1,000 something the Chinese working groups or Chinese studies group worldwide that supported also by the Chinese government. It was intended to also promote the Chinese language and culture. Not only that, if you are watching, the Hollywood, some of them are also heavily invested by the Chinese investors. And we also see that for those who are familiar with the gaming industries, one of my students wrote something related to the gaming industries and how then China's influence in terms of the soft power in this kind of industry. So even for the international relations students, now we can see that the soft power is including the gaming industries, including and how this great power is using the influence and using its role as part of the soft power campaign. Another aspect that also important in terms of the soft power and how the Chinese government is trying to influence the global governance institutions is that what we can see here, we have been living, especially we are witnessing after the World War II, that the norms, the values that are built after the World War II, mostly coming from the norms and the values that introduced or implemented by the Western norms, right? The liberal democracy, the individual rights, human rights, things like that. We are those values, those norms are part of our sort of like daily life now because it has been there and we accept that as it is. Chinese government is trying to introduce different sort of like, norms and values. It is not about the individual rights. It is not only about human rights. It is not only about the liberal, democracy sort of like values, but it's also about national sovereignty. It's also about non-intervention, no mingling, no meddling, intervening others countries' politics business. That's what China is trying to, introduce. Also, based on the experience of especially the state-owned enterprises and the way the Chinese government is, implementing the economic policies, they're introducing what we call as a state-directed development. Used to be also the characteristics of Japan and was copied by Korea into what they call as the developmental state models. China is also introducing more or less similar sort of like trajectory, what they said that state-directed development, which is vis-a-vis the free market sort of like idea. And also in terms of influencing the global politics in relating to other countries, Chinese government is trying to also introduce what they have is not something that the Western countries have been trying to impose to some of these global South countries. They introduce what they call as the win-win cooperation, community of shared future of for the mankind. And also, what they keep repeating, saying is democratizing what they said as the international relations. Something that, we never thought about it because what we accept as our common values and also norms in international relations are basically based on the Western culture, Western values, and Western sort of like norms. So in a way, the way the Chinese government is having or establishing relations with other countries are trying to introduce the concept of the correct sense of justice. So those are different kind of norms and values that what the Western sort of like culture have been trying to introduce and implement it with their partners all over the world. We also see that not only introducing via what we call as the soft power, but then the Chinese government is also behind some of what we call as the alternative global financial institutions, such as the AIIB and also the New Development Bank. As we may know it, AIIB is a very significant in terms of funding and financing the Belt and Road Initiative. It was established not so long after the introduction of the BRI, or used to be OBOR initiative, but then it was part as the Chinese government effort to finance and to fund that kind of initiative. The New Development Bank is not only China. We see that behind the New Development Bank is the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa under the BRICS. But the New Development Bank was also proposing a different sort of like alternative for the existing global financial institutions under not only the World Bank, but also the Asian Development Bank, or even like including Islamic Development Bank. So those are, I think, we see not only introducing different norms, different values, but also trying to establish something that probably would be seen as the alternative to the existing global financial institution. So what does it mean? What are the implications for the current global politics? For the US especially, the rise of China is seen as mostly threat. How does it work? We need to see whether this is really a threat, or this is just, if you are studying international relations, we are also studying something related to the perception and misperception, remember? So something that probably is not. The intention of China is not that, but then the other country, when they see how then the Chinese government is improving the technology for their military forces, it's seen as a threat for other countries. So we see that. We see that here the rise of China, especially from the NATO's perspective, is seen as a threat, and it's seen as the shifting the global balance of power. If we understand, after the end of the Cold War, then the world is entering what we call as the unilateral sort of life system, with the US as the hegemonic power. But after that, we see the decline of the US, and the multipolar sort of like system has been our sort of like characteristic in understanding the global politics. And then we also see that despite the fact that China is rising, and then one of the things that keep repeating by its top leaders is committing to promoting what they call as the free trade, something completely different with the one that we are witnessing during the Cold War. So this is the implication for the global politics from both the China's perspective and also from the US, especially as the great power. Some of the studies shows that when we are talking about the new hegemonic power trying to, seeking the new position in the global politics, it can be seen from several sort of like aspects. The existing great power may see that as a threat, then the new global power may see it as different sort of like situation. It's still the great power in the making. We understand that it is not great power yet, to be honest. But then in the process, and then it depends on how you adjust it, and how you see as part of this sort of like competition between these great two powers. And what does it mean by for the global South? When the study regarding the rise of China is becoming, mushrooming, one of the response, at least in my opinion, is, oh, okay, now we have an alternative to the existing established system. But it is still, we need to see whether this is really true or not, whether China is offering sort of like alternative to the existing systems under the, Western system. We understand since from the previous discussion that China is trying to portray herself as different from whatever the Western power has been developing. China is not the West. The Beijing is trying to treat other global South country as equal It's not trying to intervene in any domestic affairs, things like that. The soft power that I explained earlier was being implemented towards the global south. That's one of the aspects. And then also we see how then the economic development of China is also influencing some of the global south countries, including ASEAN and Indonesia. Again, China is the biggest trading partners for all ASEAN members. And those who are studying about ASEAN must understand that even within ASEAN, the trade within ASEAN is less than the trade between ASEAN and China. So that's also another fact that we need to consider. We also see that how then China's two leading state-owned policy banks that include the Export-Import Bank of China and China Development Bank now are becoming the largest financial sources for global South countries. Again, that was in line with the Belt and Road Initiative. So in this kind of situation, we can see then one aspect, the implications of the rise of China for some developing countries can be seen again as an alternative source of financing as compared to the existing or established Western sort of like powers and their institution. The last question, will that lead to the war or Cold War-like situation? Pak Philip, may you disagree with this? I don't know. But in my opinion, at least in the near future, not necessarily so. Why? Because two main reasons. The first one is the economic aspect, and the second one is the ideological aspect. The economic aspect, we discussed that previously. How then that kind of situations even showing that the what we call as the high level of economic interdependence, not only between China and the rest of the world, but China with the great power like the U.S. Something that very completely different situation during the Cold War when the USSR and the US didn't have any economic interdependence as the one that we see from China and the US. So not only China and the US, but the rest of the world, right? So taking sort of like armed conflict, it is not sort of like immediate interest, probably will be extremely even overwhelmingly costly for China, let alone for the rest of the world. So one is the aspect about the economic interdependency, economic relations that matters. So that's why it is the stake is too high, it's too costly. So that's why everyone is restraining themselves, right, not to engage in armed conflict because of the impact will be very, very, very significant for the economic development of the rest of the world. The second aspect that I found also interesting, unlike Russia, USSR, previously during the Cold War, there was no tendency from China to export the idea of the Marxism, communism, and so on and so forth. Because we see that China is communism characteristic in terms of the political system, but free market in terms of the economic development. How does it work? That doesn't make any sense previously before China was implementing that kind of two system in the country, right? So unlike USSR or the international communist movement during the Cold War, there was a tendency or there was a sort of like cosmic ideas of exporting the ideas of communism all over the world. That was not the case with China. It wasn't exporting any ideas about communism, but it is exporting the way they conduct the business, the way they develop the economic, including the state-led development, as I explained earlier, which is completely different with the exporting the ideas about Marxism, communism, and so on and so forth. So that's why there was no sort of like tendency. However, this kind of no answer requires certain conditions, including, as I mentioned earlier, about the perception and misperception. The way that the Western powers, the US government response will also affect the way China's respond to the world. Some people say that if we see China as a threat, then some people afraid that it's going to be self-fulfilling prophecy. If you see something as a threat, then it was going to be that way because a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that's why it is really, really, really delicate case. How then? That depends on the way other countries also responding to the rise of China. If here, I think from the Mueller, there is a danger of making China into a threat by treating it as a such, and then we are going to see whether we see China is a big country. We don't know any kind of domestic political dynamics in the country can also affect the way they portray their position in the world. I can imagine, I think every country has that kind of history or experience. When the U.S. Elected Donald Trump, completely different with the way they portray themselves in the world, right? Donald Trump is tend to be like inward looking, America first, that kind of attitude. So we don't know whether the Chinese government, if there has any, or if there would be any sort of like change in the domestic politics in China, they may also affect the way they portray themselves in global politics. So it will again depend on whether and how the global and the Western powers and the global South responding to the rise of China, and also it depends on what sort of like domestic political change in China. Who knows that we are going to see, say for example, the next leader of China is someone that has the hawkish sort of like ideas. That can be, and that will change all the games here. So that's why it is very important, at least in my assessment, in the near future, it's not going to lead to a Cold War-like situation. But this is still debatable in the international relations scholars. Some believe that it's going to be the Cold War-like war, but then some people, as I found it here, also have a very, limited sort of like confidence that it's going to be a Cold War sort of like situation. But again, there are some conditions to be applied. So in conclusion, I think we see that how that the China's rise is already there. It has been sort of like, we see as the reality is no longer just a prediction like Napoleon Bonaparte earlier in earlier statement. It still sleeps, but it's already awake now. So that's what the current situation and the dynamics in the global politics has to see the awakened China. That's one thing. And then, however, the rise of China and how it will go, it's still open sort of like question. Whether it's going to lead to certain direction and so on and so forth. But what we see for sure is the power dynamics in global politics at this moment will be a mix of cooperation, at the same time also competition. So strategic cooperation and strategic competition, not only between the great powers, but also between China and also among the global South in, accessing the resources provided by China. And we also see the combination about the engagement and also containment. So we cannot making sure which one is which one, but we see the combination of these sort of like, responses. Strategic cooperation, as long with in line with the strategic competition and engagement in also containment. However, we also see that some scholars also reminded us that there has been some sort of like China's position ambiguity, especially when we are talking about Taiwan and when we are talking about the South China Sea. Pak Philip, when I discuss it with some of our colleagues from ASEAN member countries, we can see the disparity among those countries, especially the Philippines and Vietnam, how strong their voice regarding the South China Sea. Unlike Indonesia or some other countries that quite, calm in responding to the China's aggression in the South China Sea. So also we see the presents what we see as the ambiguity of China, especially in terms of Taiwan and also South China Sea. And however, I think the top leaders of China keep repeating that this is the peaceful rise of China. So it depends how you see that. In order to respond that, I think it's very important for the great powers to also manage and making some of adjustment. We see from the WTO, we see from the UN, we see from some of the existing conflict between Ukraine and Russia, Palestine and Israel and things like that. We see how then the great powers so need to make adjustment, making some of the uncomfortable concessions because this is still in the making. I think I will stop there. Looking forward to hearing for your questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Winanti, for that insightful presentation on the rise of China. So the sleeping giant is awake, and perceptions and misperceptions will determine what will be the outcome of the power play in the global south. Thank you very much for that presentation. And now we will open the floor for question and answer session. And just briefly state your name, country, faculty, and then just very briefly your question. So in the first part, we will take 3 questions, and she will answer, and then later on we take additional 3 questions. Can you help with the mic? Okay. So first, let's start with tourists, and then we start with our Mas Gondrong here, and then we start with the one in the black jacket.
Test. Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Toris, and I'm from a Master of Political Science. Before, I want to say thank you, Bu Poppy, for explaining about the rise of China, especially in terms of between the global South countries, which also include many African countries. And I'm really interested also in this topic. In the African continent, China's movement and also China's influence also dominated in the Africa continent, especially in the current situation. And surprisingly, in the between 1950s and also 1980s, most of the African, they gained their independence. And during that day, China and also Taiwan experienced like civil war, and they competitively try to gain diplomatic recognition toward African countries. And surprisingly, most of African countries, they tend to lean and cooperate with Taiwan during those years until around 2005. Like I took a study case within the Senegal country. Most African countries, they defect from Taiwan to China. Until this day, I think only Eswatini, the only country in Africa that still support Taiwan. So my question is, before with the African countries, I think it's similar. It's also they also adopt kind of development scheme of cooperation and also mutual gain of the cooperation bilateral. But the phenomenon of defecting most of the African countries from Taiwan to China, I think it's quite interesting. And the question is, what are the really strategic approaches that what China carried out within the African continents? Is it relate to the ideological or the volume of the cooperation? Because in fact, what China did today in the African continent, same what Taiwan did within those years. So I think that's my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Moderator and Bu Poppy. And regarding the quote that you said before about the Bonaparte said, let China sleep. And my question is, uh, when did China? When were the China awake? And I believe that the factor that drive China become the superpower in the region, global south. There are two factors, and the first factor is the need of interest, and the second is there was a vacuum of power after Cold War, and that what I believe. And what do you think? Is it true? What I believe? Thank you, Bu Poppy.
All right, thank you for this great opportunity. So I would like to introduce myself. My name is Susilo. I'm from ME in Economics. So as mentioned before about the rise of China and economic development influence, because like I'm coming from economics perspective. So as you mentioned before, like it's about FDI, because I'm considering about this topic about the foreign investment. So as we know that foreign investment is it's play a crucial role in the developments of less developed different countries. So I have two questions here. The first question is, how has China's economic development impacted the global trade and investment patterns? What are the implications for other countries in terms of competition and opportunities? So the second question is, what factors have contributed to the China's rapid economic growth over the past few decades, and how sustainability in this trajectory, the challenges that China faces in continuing to develop its economy, and what the policies might be effective addressing these challenges. Thank you so much.
You for the questions. I think I will try to answer the first three questions first. Is that all right? Before we can accept other questions, Pa Philip, I think your students are very smart. Very challenging questions to me today. First, I think regarding the African countries, yes, thank you for sharing your thought about this. I also have one student writing something related to this defection from Taiwan to China, but then it was related to the post COVID-19. Earlier, that country receiving aid from Taiwan, but then China came and then defected to China, things like that. Anyway, but yes, I think one of the aspects is that despite the fact that this is part of the China's ambiguity when it comes to Taiwan, China leaders may say that it's not going to intervene in any case in the domestic affairs, things like that, But then when it comes to Taiwan, China is being completely my apologies for my word, hostile. Yeah. China is always like using the terms and conditions. If you wanna receive my aid or development, then one China policy. That applies to all. I think that includes Indonesia. Despite the fact that we have our business and trade relations with Taiwan, but no diplomatic relations, right? So I guess what happened is again because of China came with that kind of conditions. So in my opinion, that comes into China's ambiguity, especially regarding to Taiwan. So that's why when China came with that kind of policy and the recipient countries thought that this is going to be very significant for their own development, then I think they're going to be very very pragmatic. Probably we have to share our experience. We adopt one China policy, but we keep developing our trade relations with Taiwan. That can be also a good strategy for other countries as well. So yes, I guess why then it happens in some of the continental Africa for this kind of attitude, because when China has this kind of policy, especially in terms of investment aid and stuff, it applies with the one China policy. So it depends on the country whether they're going to accept it or not, right? Rationally speaking, pragmatically speaking, I think the country will receive the biggest, investment. That's one thing. And Mas Kun, if I'm not mistaken, yes, your question. regarding when did China awake? I think that's also a good question as well. China implementing significant change in 1978. I think with the reform of China, I found it very fascinating to see people from China to migrating to Hong Kong because they would like to find a better life. So it was started in 1978, and why it was concentrated in that region because it was still trial and error policy. If it failed, then only in that region, not to other Greater China. But then we see that it was successful. So beginning with the very not small for China, but not us. It's concentrated into certain area in Guangdong province, and then the development was started. As we see that previously, when China still adopted the communist economic system, so no matter what you do, then you will get the same. So that's why they changed the policy in that region, that you are becoming much more sort of like capitalist attitude in that region. And we have to admit it was successful. When it was successful in that region, the same sort of like policy was replicated in some other areas. Then we see the spread of the development in China. But it was in 1978, 30 years later, we can see the result of that development. So the rise of China when she awakes, actually starting around early 2000. It was some scholars say that it shouldn't be just awake, it's just because it was before one of the greatest sort of like civilization, but then it's declining, and then now it's re-emerged. It's not the new thing for China to become the great power. It used to be the center of civilization as well when we're talking about the history aspect. So we see that I think around 2000, early 2000, people started to see China is completely different sort of like attitude. So the process itself, it wasn't really short. It was actually starting from 1978, like 1979. So 2018, when I visited China, they're just celebrating like 40 years of the reform, and it was really amazing to see how then they compare previously prior to 1978 and then after 40 years, very completely different sort of like attitude. So why then it was after the Cold War, but then I think it's, I don't know, my opinion is just coincidence. It was the process itself is not sudden. It was long before the Cold War, during the Cold War, but then the result is happening almost like the same time when the end of the after 10 years of the end of the Cold War. So that's why I think probably you are right. It was like feeling the, vacuum of power, but it wasn't vacuum. It was the US as the unipolar, unilateral, unipolar kind of power at that time. But then we see after the 9/11 incident, we see the declining of the US hegemonic at that time. So that's why we see like very both we can see from different sort of like perspective. Domestically, we see that it was the sort of like the result of long planned development starting from 1978, but then from the systemic or from the structural and from the global politics point of view, at the same time, there was a change in the global politics due to the US declining after the 9/11, but not after the Cold War because it's already 10 years after the Cold War. I guess that's my response to your question. And I try to catch your question, but it seems related to the economic development, how it affects the global trade, impact for other countries, and how sustain this kind of trajectory. Is that all right? Okay. The first thing is China. I think one of the biggest moment for China to engage in the global trade when China is applying for the World Trade Organization membership. You know that it took almost like 10 years before China was finally accepted as part of the member of the WTO, something that only China could do that. I cannot imagine because I think all the members mostly were the original member of the GATT, then GATT transformed into the WTO, then after that China was one of the earlier members after the GATT becomes the WTO. And it took almost like 10 years for the negotiation because as part of China is becoming the member of the WTO, China has to comply with much more stringent sort of like conditions from the WTO, especially from the US. One of the aspects that the other members of the WTO quite concerns is regarding protectionism that was applied or implemented by the Chinese government. Until now, that kind of attitude has been sources of dispute among the great powers, especially the US, the EU, and China. That's the impact for the global trade and how then China has to adjust domestic policies in order to be comply with the WTO conditions. But now we can see that how China starting as China is becoming the member of the WTO, that also influenced the way the WTO is organized. Used to be only India and Brazil who quite outspoken regarding some of the conditions in the WTO, but now we also have China. And if you see from the data from the dispute settlement mechanism in the WTO, usually it was only involving the great powers. The dispute usually between the US and the EU, US and Japan, EU and Japan, and now China, US, China, EU, China, Japan, and all those great powers. Other countries, including Indonesia, here and there, yes, we do have some dispute, but then it's not as many as the great powers because the system much more difficult for the less developing countries to be part of that kind of system. But then affect the way the global trade was organized. Until now, the WTO only had a very limited sort of like agreements that can be agreed among the members because again China, India, Brazil are trying to be more outspoken regarding those kind of conditions under the WTO. And whether this kind of trajectory of development will sustain, I'm sort of like a person who believe in the role of the government, no matter what. So that's why I think it's very important to see because we see the successful of Japan, the successful of Korea, and now we see China is also somehow government-led development, which probably not all applicable to all countries. Again, it depends on how good the government is, whether the government is also applying really sort of like good governance kind of thing. Otherwise, then it's going to be very difficult. We see we don't know. I think every country has different sort of like trajectory, but seeing that state-led development as successful as some countries would give us another alternative rather than the liberal approach or market-led development. I guess that's my response. Thank you.
I'm not sure. Okay, I think we can before, but I think before we go to the second session, let's give opportunity to our lecturers and fellows if they want to ask questions, and then we can. Okay, no questions. Okay, let's just go. One, and let's have Ararat, and let's have Keba.
Thank you very much, Professor, for the remarkable presentation. I am Aman from Afghanistan, a student of politics. I think some of the parts of my question already answered in your recent, perspectives, but I want to ask a question that, as we know, the term of global north is typically refers to economically developed and industrialized countries, and global south generally refers to less economically developed in industrialized countries. But looking to China, in this regard, it arises question too. The question is that with the rise of China from global south countries in Asia, What can be the positive hopes and optimisms for the rest of global South countries that China is rising dynamically? Or not just China will be included to the global North narratives? Thank you.
Thank you for having, thank you for coming, and I'm having the chance to see you for the second time. I had you in Jakarta. Yeah, it was a pleasure for me to listen to your presentation on China as well. I would like to refer to the last part, the Cold War session and the paranoia of China's rise. To what extent the worrisome is rational, and to what extent it's exaggerated? Because if I compare to Southeast Asia, now I'm facing, before I was in Malaysia, now I'm in Indonesia, there is a big voice of worrisome of China's rise, and especially when it comes not to economic issues, but when it comes to South China Sea issue that you have mentioned. But if I make a comparison with Eastern Europe and Middle East, where I come from, we hardly hear that part of global south, if you want to say it, we hardly hear such worrisome of China's rise. On contrary, there is a hope that finally the unipolar world and impose politics starting from Iraq and even Iraq invasion and even before, that it will be kind of balance of power in Middle East. And now we are facing, especially in the Palestine, that China's support for Palestine is more evident. And they were referring to this even a few years ago, that they will support two-state solution. And we see what the US, especially in United Nations, that they are they are not agreeing to stop the ceasefire. In this sense, to what extent, I know that China is far in security issue, too far from Middle East, and of course from Eastern Europe, and here they are closer. So to what extent, it's interesting for me to know that the rationality or the exaggeration is more. Thank you very much.
Is Umi who raised her hand?
But you
Was it
mentioned
Umi?
Keba.
Oh, I was seeing Keba's face. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Poppy. So I want to inquire about the Chinese debt trap diplomacy, because I am interested in your analysis regarding this economic strategy employed by China. So what I really want to know is whether this strategy is deliberately to infiltrate and exert control over states, or it is merely an unintended outcome to economic capitalism.
Thank you for the question, and I'm happy that finally I got the question from a lady in the room. Thank you for that. Well, the first question regarding the whether the global south, China is coming from south, and it sort of like gives us a hope that the global south that used to be considered as least developed countries can also emerge as a powerful country, right? Well, yeah, I can understand that kind of sense. When we're trying to understand global south, we also have to understand that within the global south, we also see hierarchy. You see, like, the global south is ranging from, I don't know, China, India, Brazil, even Indonesia, South Africa, and then we also see small island countries also including in that sort of like, category. So nor surprising when some of the global south countries like China can also emerge as, powerful country. That's one thing. In South Korea, we're trying to introduce different sort of like trajectory of development, not results. the second question regarding the to what extent the war is sort of like worrisome, I suppose what some of countries in ASEAN, well, I should mention earlier that even within the ASEAN member states, responding to China is somehow quite challenging. Some countries are seeing China as neutral. Probably Indonesia can be in that sort of like position, but some countries also perceive China or having the perception as China as a threat, mostly because they're sharing the borders, which have also some of the dispute on that borders. I can understand why then some friends and colleagues in Middle East countries or other countries who are not sharing the borders with China will see that as a distance sort of like problems. But for some countries that sharing the border with China, it is completely different sort of like condition. We also see that some countries in ASEAN, like the Philippines, they are also having long relations with the US, and they were under the auspices of the US for the military protection. So it's a very different historical sort of like engagement with China. But then how and then to what extent that it can be real sort of like real war? As I mentioned earlier, other than Taiwan and South China Sea, China can be more reliable partners. But when it comes to Taiwan and Southeast Asia, we are I think we need to be more cautious. So probably so that's why for you and friends in a little bit far countries, you don't see that as a sort of like problems because you are not dealing directly. But then India and China, they're sharing borders, and there was some also dispute regarding their borders that was also becoming an issue between these two countries. That the reason why then India pulled out, withdrew from the economic cooperation under the regional cooperation economic partnership or RCEP. That was the moment when India and China were engaging in conflict or border conflict with among them. I guess that's my response. Last but not least, I guess this is the China's debt trap situation. In my opinion, this is very interesting. We can discuss this a little bit more later on, or probably I can also propose you to write something for your, I don't know, thesis or for your dissertation. Why then, if it is the design, why then that trap situation is not happening to all countries, but why it is only certain countries, right? Why other countries quite quote unquote all right. So that's why I think it is a combination between the mechanism, the scheme, but then also internal domestic politics situation in the recipient countries that also matters. Why then we can see some of the issues, some of the problems in within the domestic politics in these countries that now they are having or experiencing the death threat sort of like situation, while for some other countries that are quite okay internally, they can avoid this kind of scheme. So if your question is it by design, I don't think it is by design. It is also related to the conditions in the existing conditions in recipient countries that also affect how then the implementation or the result of this economic cooperation with China. I guess that's my response.
Oh, it's okay. Thank you for that response to the questions, Reid. And due to limited time, we will not be able to further continue with the question and answer session. But then, as we come to the end of the program, just a brief note on what has been presented, and also part of those are concerned for norms and the rules of engagement that the world have already adopted, to which is based on the Western culture, but also the Western norms and values after the Second World War. but also the implication in the global south, whether she raised a question in the presentation where there is there is going to be a cold war like situation, or even an armed confrontation. But then the response is on the negative, that there are of course economic disadvantages to China in this sense, and China will not be interested in having a confrontation that is going to put a stoppage to the already established containment policies to stop its economy from growing. So but things might change, the change of leadership, but and also lastly political engagement in China's domestic affairs might also reflect on its engagement in international relations. But I think I will take this opportunity as a moderator. I have my own question. um, what's the overall observation from scholars like yourself and those that you engage with about the shared perspective that the global south countries share? Are they having some sort of a perceived rule of engagement? For example, I realize in ASEAN is having um, uh, an inclusive Indo-Pacific strategy that is being chaired by spearheaded by Indonesia. Do you see a similar thing happening, for example, in the case of Africa or the global south, regionally or even in the individual states?
I think responding to your concern, I would like to start when ASEAN and Indonesia are using the term of Indo-Pacific is basically is already excluding China. Why? Because the term of the Indo-Pacific is rejected by China, despite the fact that Indonesia and ASEAN are trying to say that this is a very different conceptualization of the Indo-Pacific. But by using that term, because it's already rejected by China, but insisting using that term, you're already positioning yourself that you are excluding it without realizing or without unrealizing it. I don't know whether, I don't know about Philip. Yeah, I think it's in diplomatic sort of like relations, it's need to be more delicate in that sense. By adopting the Indo-Pacific terms, it's already, because again, China is already rejecting the idea about the Indo-Pacific. That's one thing. Despite the fact that Indonesia and ASEAN are trying to propose different sort of like conceptualization of Indo-Pacific, but still you keep using that term, meaning that you are already positioning yourself. So, but I suppose it's unintended. No one in ASEAN or even Indonesian government is realizing that by using that term is already, excluding China. So the Indo-Pacific term is already problematic, in my opinion. But then there's the third aspect. I think ASEAN and Indonesia are trying to be more quote unquote neutral in terms of the the rivalry between the US and China, because we do understand that positioning explicitly to one position to another is going to be very risky, except for certain countries in ASEAN. So that's why in ASEAN there is no solid sort of like response regarding these two competition. As we can see, Manila is going to be a little bit hostile because they have the dispute with China. But then Vietnam is also the same. But then Indonesia, Jakarta, Kuala Lumpur, and Singapore probably need more sort of like using the toned down terms when dealing with both the rivalry in US and China. Responding to your question whether this kind of response can be seen from different region, I think also with your comment earlier that some regions don't see China as we in Asia or ASEAN see China, because we are sharing borders with China. So that also giving different sort of like perception regarding the rise of China. As we can see here, say for example, despite the fact that say there was a dispute in somewhere else in Europe or somewhere else, then it is not directly affected with the region in Asia. Probably we have a completely different attitude as well. We can be much more quote unquote objective, probably, Or here, when you are sharing the borders, then you can be much more rational or pragmatic in a way as well, because we see the immediate sort of like threat, if I may say that. So in responding to your question, I don't think other regions have that kind of necessity to the way ASEAN or other ASEAN countries responding to the rise of China, because again, what you see is a very different ways of China. The only condition that China will apply to other countries is about Taiwan, but there is nothing to do with South China Sea. So that's my response. I hope it respond to you.
Yes, thank you very much. And we've come to the end of the program. Thank you very much, Prof. Winanti. And thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Now I will pass the mic to the MC.
Thank you very much, Dr. Poppy. That was a very meaty, insightful discussion. Well, ladies and gentlemen, finally we have now reached the end of our agenda. We hope that this event gives you valuable insights and will broaden your knowledge. But before we close our agenda today, I would like to remind you that after this, we still have panel session. And now let's have a quick photo session to capture our memory. To in the committee, please kindly to prepare the photo session. And once again, thank you